All right, Wendy Lee here. A few weeks ago, I started sharing a little bit about my adoption story and some of the ugly truths behind that situation. And so I want to first start by saying that my son Malachi knows that I'm talking about these things. And I love my child. I'm so grateful to be his mom. Our story ended, some ways terrible and some ways beautiful. Didn't end. Our story's still going. Um, but Malachi agrees with me. And if you guys haven't seen my first video about my adoptions and that situation and orphanage trafficking and bringing awareness to that, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that um, before watching this video. I will actually link it below so you can check that out. So in 2018, me and my husband at the time adopted 3 kids from Sierra Leone, West Africa. And we brought those children home. And, we were excited. We were happy. It was a long process. It was expensive. It was exhausting. It was emotional. And, they came home in September of 2018, right? Yes, September 2018. And they became part of our family very quickly. And we had 3 kids. We had Malachi, we had Merrick, and then we had Esther. And in 2020, so they came home in 2018. So Merrick was with us for a whole year and a half. It was 2020, April of 2020, when I found out some devastating news. And so before I share that and what that looked like and how we got there, I want to say to you, one of my biggest concerns with adopting an older boy, when we wanted to adopt Malachi, we found out he had an older brother. One of my very first questions was, is there any history of sexual abuse? Is there anything that I need to know? Anything that happened at the orphanage? That was my biggest fear. My biggest fear, especially when I found out I was pregnant with a little girl. My biggest fear was sexual abuse and bringing that into my home. And so I was assured that there has never, ever been a report of sexual abuse in the entire orphanage ever. And that the aunties are very great about making sure that none of that happens and da 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 da. And so there were a couple of signs. Well, when Merrick first came home, he was very attached to Sloan. She was a baby. She was a year and a half when he came home, when all of the kids came home. And so I had 7 kids in my house, and he was very sweet to Sloan. And I remember looking at them. I have pictures of them together and thinking, that's why I had Sloan, to be a companion to Merrick, because Merrick was extremely quiet, extremely withdrawn, very hard to get to know. But he seemed to love Sloan. Would bring her little sweets, little snacks. He carried her everywhere. He adored her. And as time went on, I was like, I'm so grateful. Like, I'm so grateful for their sweet relationship. And I'm not going to get into graphic details here, but I will tell you and let you put the pieces together. That my daughter, all of a sudden at 2.5 years old, about a year and a half after, probably a little over a year after our adoptions were final and everybody was home, would come into my room at night and not want to sleep by herself anymore. She would climb out of her toddler bed, come in the room, and she's kept complaining that a certain part of her was bothering her, that it hurts. And never did my mind go to thinking anything was wrong. And then one day I was sitting and she made the same complaint again. And I said, does anybody, touch you? And her response was, Merrick does all the days. And I'm going to leave it at that. There was more discussion. There was more detail that came out. But a 2.5-year-old child does not explain in detail what happens to that level if it didn't happen. And so, you guys, the blood left my body. Literally the most devastating thing I ever experienced. And so I called friends. I called the church. I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? He was 18 at the time. And there were some signs of some inappropriate things. One advanced towards me that made me uncomfortable. And I just, shove it away. I'm like, maybe he just doesn't know better, or maybe he's confused, and I made excuses for it. And then there was things that he wrote. He wanted to be a rapper, and he wrote these raps. And anyway, and they were extremely graphic and inappropriate, and really reinforced the fact that what my daughter told me was absolutely true. And so I'll never forget, I reached out to the church at the time that we were going to, and to the youth pastor who had visited him in Africa back in the day. And I said, I need help. I don't know what to do. I needed the boy out of my house, because I needed to figure out how to move forward and where to go from here. And that youth pastor said, remember, he's your son. You adopted him. Like, zero compassion for what I was going through. And I was in shock. And I said, yes. And my biological son, if my biological son, I found out they did that, they'd be on the street right now. They'd be out of my house now. But he's not, because he doesn't know. Where's he going to go? What's he going to do? And I called my dear friend, who I appreciate so much. She was a principal at the middle school near us. And she's, and this mattered to me at the time. She's a Black woman. I said, this is the situation. This is what I'm facing. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go from here. It is, Jen. I don't know where to go. I love him, but this can't be. This can't happen. And long story short, she called people, she asked around, we looked for group homes to put him in. And basically we got to the point where we have no other choice but to put him in the homeless shelter. And the homeless shelter in Nashville has programs, like recovery programs. They feed them, they take care of them. And so we put him in the homeless shelter. And I want you guys to know that that was the hardest thing ever. Because as upset as I was about what was happening to my daughter, what he had done to my daughter, I loved him, and it was devastating, heart-wrenching. And we took him to that homeless shelter, and I still wanted to be his mom, and I still wanted to care for him. I still wanted to love him, but I needed him to admit it. I needed him to say sorry. I needed him to get help. And he was in there for about a week, and then he kept asking for a cell phone. And so we brought him a cell phone, and it took about 2 days, and he found a friend to pick him up. And it's a friend that he grew up in the orphanage with, and they took off and they went to a home in Indiana where this woman took them in. And I'll just say this, the woman I called her once. He gave me her number. I called her, and very unstable. I'll just say that. I don't know what happened at that point. I've seen him 2 times since. And the last time I saw him, I was not long ago. It was probably 8 months ago. He was in Tennessee and he wanted to see me. And I thought that he was going to apologize. I thought he was going to tell the truth. And I saw him, and instead of a boy who was sorry and remorseful and asking to mend things, he asked me for money, and the things he told me he was about and wanted to do were very, I'll just say he needs a lot of prayer. He's very lost. He's very broken. And why am I sharing all this? One, because I get questions all the time of, Wendy, what the heck happened? Like, where is your other kid? And when people ask me how many kids I have, I'm like 7, 6, 7, I don't know. I have a lot. And I want people to know, like, it wasn't an easy thing, you know? It was like saying goodbye to my own flesh and blood. It truly was. And I know my ex-husband struggles too with it. It's a very emotional and terrible thing to go through. And my daughter, you know, she doesn't remember. And thankfully, she's young enough. She won't see this on social media for a long time. But I'll say this. The reason I'm sharing this, other than those things, is because we were told that there was no history of sexual abuse in that orphanage ever. And I have since been in communication with people that know for a fact, because they were intimately involved with that orphanage, that there was indeed rampant sexual abuse in that orphanage. And this was hidden. And let me tell you guys, the fact that there's 0 reports ever should have been a clue that they just don't report it. Because there's no way 100 kids in a small, you know, compound that all come from broken families, that there's nothing. And many of the boys in that age, not many, but there's a handful of boys in that age group that were adopted around similar times, and there are several that are out, disassociated with the families that brought them home and have had similar experiences. And so this is yet another, again, go back to my original video. We were manipulated when it came to, we were paying for our children when other people were paying for them, so they were double dipping on money. We were told our kids are orphans, and then come to find out, my boys had a living mother and other children. And I just want to start talking about the things that nobody wants to talk about, because yes, it gets swept under the rug, even with the families that have adopted. And again, I might make enemies sharing this stuff. Like, I get it. If you're one of the families that adopted and you're just absolutely terrified or ticked off that I'm sharing this, I'm sorry. But it's just, we want to we're these heroes, we adopted these kids, we have all this wonderful stuff, blah, 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 blah. And nobody talks about the crap that you go through. Nobody talks about the devastation. Nobody talks about the fact that I have to share with my sweet son Malachi, like, why his brother's not around anymore. Like, it's devastating. It's devastating. And so light needs to be brought, because there needs to be more support. There needs to be more education. Another thing that was corrupt, and I'm going to wrap it up with this, and then my videos in the future, you guys, I have some more people that have stories, because I want to shed light on what's going on with not just this orphanage, but many. And I want to bring light to what orphanage trafficking is, and let people really see what that is, and think about who you're donating money to, okay? Or who, if you're wanting to adopt internationally or within the US, understand what an orphan truly is, and protect these kids, man. Like, that's ultimately, and I want to share with you all organizations that are out there that are fixing the damage that we can support. My sweet friend Jen works for an organization that these kids that have aged out of this orphanage, who are basically turned over to the streets, that she's bringing them in and teaching them. Her organization is bringing these kids in and teaching them life skills, because that's one thing in the orphanage, they're not getting it. They're all in this, and I'm going to share a link below for you guys to check out too, of a man who grew up in an orphanage just like this, saying like where it's lacking. okay, is that they're not getting the life skills to go out and like be humans in society and like get jobs and be an asset to their communities, because they're sheltered in this compound and they know nothing except, you know, what they're being taught in there. And then they become adults and it's like, see you later. Bye, have fun, enjoy life. The rate of suicide among those that they call them care leavers, so the kids that have left the care of an orphanage, right? Care leavers, the rate of suicide, the rate of crime is outrageous. It's so high. So we need to be a part of a solution and not making the problem worse. And so the one other thing I was going to share was what? Oh my gosh, sorry, I got off track and lost it. But bringing awareness, again, it goes back to awareness, bringing awareness to these things. And from the outside looking in, when you see a family, because there's lots of families that I watched have these kids that they adopted and all of a sudden one of them's gone and nobody says anything, right? And I get it. I was that person. And it's so hard to know, like, do I talk about it or do I not? Like, it's so difficult. It's so difficult. But the other thing was what? I'm so sorry. I'm going blank. I wish I could pause this right now. There was one more thing I wanted to share with you guys, but I'll have to share it in the next video. But it's important that we, again, know what you're donating to. A lot of people reach out to me and goes, oh my gosh, I'm donating to this organization. Is this corrupt? And I want you guys to know, like, most things aren't corrupt. What I want to bring awareness to is specifically regarding orphanages and adoption. Okay, orphanages and adoption. Orphanages that are taking your money to sponsor kids and then facilitating adoptions. That's the other thing I want to share. It just came back to me. I knew it would. There is a law in the country where my kids are from that if you're going to adopt internationally, that you have to live resident in the country, Sierra Leone, with them for 6 months as foster parents before you can adopt them and bring them home. Okay. We were told this, but we've worked out a deal. We've worked out a deal that because you've Skyped with him for so many years, once a month, we're counting that time. And let's write down all the trips that you and your, husband have taken over, and we'll add up that time. And they finagled it to make it look like 6 months worth of time. I can tell you it wasn't 6 months worth of time. Definitely not. And hindsight, you just, when you're doing the adoption process, you're like, oh, okay, I have Catholic Charities telling me this is what we're doing to get around this. And I'm like, okay. And the government's allowing it. But here's the deal, you guys. It's not okay. It's against the law. It was fudging documents. It was fudging the truth to be able to find a loophole. And there's laws in place for a reason. And we can blame their government. We can blame our government. We can blame the orphanage. We can blame me. We can blame Catholic Charities. Whatever. Okay? There's plenty of people that can take the blame on this. But again, I just want to bring awareness. Because now, hindsight, I see why these rules should be in place, why they are in place, and why they should be followed. And so I want to encourage anyone that's working with organizations or doing adoptions or whatever, that you pay attention to the laws. And if you're working with an organization that's okay with loopholes, that should be a red flag. That should be a red flag. So anyway, this is not a very organized, oh, wow, Jen, really? Yeah, Catholic Charities has facilitated a lot of adoptions. And I've heard good stories and I've heard terrible stories. I guess it depends on who you're working with there. But, again, my goal is to bring awareness and eventually bring you guys solutions. And I want to say this one other thing. After I did my last live, I called Malachi and I said, I hope it's okay, buddy. But I shared, the fact that you have a mom and a brother and 2 sisters in Sierra Leone. And I said, as much, I said, I love you. I'm so glad you're part of our family. I said, but can you imagine right now if something happened to your dad, my ex-husband, and I couldn't take care of you guys, but you're old enough to work. And I said, we have to go drop Sloan off at an orphanage because we can't take care of her. We can't afford to take care of her. Can you imagine how devastating, like, as a mother? And I said, I would want somebody to help me and not take my baby away, And he's like, you're right, Mom. They should have helped my mom. They should have helped my mom. And so he knows that I'm sharing this. And he said, Wendy, he said, Mom, one day I want to go to Sierra Leone and I want to make a difference. And I want to help families stay together. And so that's why I'm sharing this stuff, because that's where we want to get to. We want to get to the point that we can help keep families intact. That's what's ideal. That's what's ideal. And so if you're sponsoring through an organization that's helping families stay together, like Compassion International, you sponsor a child and they're helping that child with education and food so they don't have to become orphans, right? That is wonderful. Keep doing it. And again, I'm going to bring you guys a few more organizations that you can help if you feel called to do so. So thanks for listening. And through my tears, this is really the only stuff that really gets me emotional. So thank you for being here. Take care.